A future event or circumstance which is possible but cannot be predicted with certainty. Provision for such an event or circumstances. The absence of certainty in events. Philosophy, the absence of necessity. That's how the Oxford English Dictionary defines contingency. When you look at that, you say, yeah, okay, that's for the Goyim. That's for a secular world. But those who believe in God don't live without certainty. They have the promise that history will one day reveal how the sword will be turned into the plowshare, the lion will dwell with the lamb. The whole thrust of messianic views of history, and with the certainty. On the contrary, you're supposed to believe with a certainty. Ani ma'amin b'emunah shlema, that's the song. I believe with a perfect faith. B'biat HaMashiach, with the coming of the Messiah. Va'af al pi sheyitmamea im kol zeh achakelo. Even though he's delayed, I will constantly yearn for him and wait for him. There used to be Jews who used to go to sleep at night with their luggages packed to be ready in case the Mashiach comes in the morning or at night. So the notion that history is really protected, the whole notion of divine providence, that history is not an arbitrary, not necessary. On the contrary, there's no contingent feature in Jewish history. We know where the future is going. And if you read carefully Yitzhak Greenberg, you see that plays a central role in his whole important theology. The thrust towards overcoming death, the thrust towards eventual triumph of justice. You had this as well in secular views in Hegel. You saw this as well deeply in Marx, where they thought that they have the key to the whole process of history. And the whole notion of the dialectic, the thesis and the antithesis, and then the synthesis, and then it goes further and it's constantly moving, that there is an imminent thrust to history. There's an imminent law of historical development. There's an imminent structure where history is going. So Hegel and Marx were influenced by the biblical view that we have a Lord of history. Atheism is a giving up the sense of certainty about where the future will go. The believer lives with certainty. Okay, that seems the accepted version. My talk tonight is to undermine this view of Jewish history and to argue that there's no certainty in the direction of history. None at all. When people ask me, can Auschwitz happen again? I say, absolutely. Is it possible for us to lose the state of Israel? God forbid. I don't want to even think of that thought, but I know that's a real possibility. Is it possible that Iran will drop a bomb? Yeah. Do you have any guidance as to necessity that it won't happen? And no matter how much Obamas you have in the world, I don't have that certainty. And I would say not only don't I have this certainty, but I want to take you on a trip to show you that the initial tradition also was filled with ambiguity. And let me quote a Gemara for you. Omar Rav Shmuel Bar Nachmani, it's in Sanhedrin, Tzadek Zayin, Amud Bet. So check it out. Omar Rav Shmuel Bar Nachmani, Omar Rav Yonoseh, Tipach Atzman Shal Mechashvei Kitzim. Shahaya Omrim Kivin Shegiya Et HaKetz V'lo Ba Shuv einu ba, ela chakelo, im yitmamea chakelo. Kolu kol hakitzin means there's no more predictive possibility to understand history. Kolu kol hakitzin. Ketz means a determined moment in history when the Messiah will come. And they used to read the book of Daniel to see if they could figure out some hints there of some formula which would enable them to predict. And in some way, this yearning for messianism was the defining feature of the Jews' attitude to Jewish history. Things look difficult, things look nearly impossible, but no, we know that God promised that ultimately justice will triumph in history. How are you certain? Because we have God's promise. Now here the Gemara starts asking very interesting questions. Kolu kol hakitzin. The ketz is over. Don't look for a predetermined moment in history when you think the Messiah is going to come. I recommend you reading the epistle to the Jews of Yemen by Maimonides, who deals with this, and my commentary on it in the book called Leadership and Crisis, published by JPS. I would love to spend a week with you just reading that epistle. And the reason why they say, don't predict and don't define history that, in 40 years the Messiah will come. Because in some way, if he doesn't, then people sort of give up all hope on history. And this is what happened with Shabtai Tzvi, and this is what happened throughout Jewish history. Messianic speculation in Israel by Abba Hillel Silva would show you all the different messiahs that emerged in Jewish history. You scratch the Jew who looked cynical, and he was hoping. What could be the new Messiah? For modern Jews, there was emancipation, where Jews were given rights. For many Jews, America was the messianic reality, because fundamentally they had a sense of equality and participation, and that became for them the fulfillment of the prophetic hope for history. And many Israeli thinkers who looked upon Israel as in some way the birth pangs of the Messiah. And there were people in the Six-Day War who would write books predicting the direction of history and the footsteps of the Messiah. He's on the way. Just hold on a little longer. And then when and they looked upon the government as instruments. I remember giving a lecture, and I would say that Arik Sharon is not the Messiah. So there was an Israeli there who said to me, Ata Yehudi Galuti, you're a Golus Jew. You don't understand. Arik Melech Yisrael, that was a song they were singing. Arik is the king of Israel. What undermined this whole nationalist messianic fervor in Israel was giving back the land in Gaza. Because if the government is an instrument for Messiah, then how can you imagine them giving up some of the territory to the Arabs? So that created a crisis and a real depression in the country. Where are we? Are we living in a country that is leading us towards a messianic fulfillment and a new redemption? I mean, if you live here, the rhetoric of prophecy returning, of a new Jew, and the sword will be turned into the plowshare, not yet. But fundamentally, that was the thrust. So what I'm saying, it was prevalent all over. There was a sense of certainty. And I claim that that is a tragedy in Jewish history. And the Talmud has a discussion. an interesting discussion. Is the Messiah coming dependent upon Israel doing teshuvah? Is it dependent upon a moral renewal of the Jewish people? Or will he come independent of our moral change? And one teacher said, Daya la'avel sheyamod be'evlo. It is sufficient that the mourner should sustain himself in the midst of his mourning. And there was another one who said, no, Yisrael has to do tshuva. The one who said, Daya la'avel sheyamod be'evlo, I'm sorry that I didn't prepare these texts, because in preparing my lecture I realized I wanted to say this also. So you can never tell. I'll come to the booklet. I promise you. Bill, I will be on target and a good boy. But Chaim said, I move in new directions. You never know where Hartman is going to take you. So that's true. I don't even know myself. And I like to be surprised. That's the fun of being a teacher. You think you know what you're going to talk about, and then suddenly something hits you, a different insight. And you open up windows. Oh, that's the great experience. You start walking there, and you don't know if you're going to get lost there. And you need Daniel to remind you, Pass, stop walking. Get back to home. And in some way, I have that tendency to forget where I am, and that's why many times in my lectures I have to say to people, what did I say beforehand? Why did I digress? But Daniel has learned to live with his father for many, many years, as I've learned to live with him. So then the Gemara says, Omar Rav, Kolu kol hakitzin, ve'ein hadavar talui ela b'tshuva u'masim tovim. There's no more predictive necessity. The thing depends upon tshuva and good deeds. Shmuel Omar, Rav and Shmuel, Dai la'avel sheyamod be'evlo. It is sufficient for the mourner not to go into despair, but to be able to handle his mourning and going on. Dayel la'avel sheyamod ba'evlo. And then the Gemara says, it's not only a machlokes amaroyim, it's a machlokes in Tanoim as well. So I advise all the rabbis who are here for the next 2 weeks to look up the Gemara in Sanhedrin. I'm going to speak to you tomorrow to see if you looked it up. Tzadik Zayin Amud Bet. Now look what they say here. Rabbi Yeshua gets up and says, Im ein osin tshuva, ein nigalin. If they don't do tshuva, they will not be redeemed. Meaning, what is he saying? Is really redemption a contingent event? Because maybe people won't do tshuva. How do you know they will do tshuva? Im ein osin tshuva, ein nigalin. If they don't do tshuva and go through a moral renewal, there won't be any redemption. So he says, I can't tolerate that. That creates uncertainty about the direction of history. Therefore, I claim, and it's interesting, his view, El HaKadosh Baruch Hu mamid lahen melech shegzerotav kashot kahaman. God will establish an evil king whose decrees will be as difficult as Haman, and therefore Israel will do tshuva and return to the right path. God will see to it that Israel will change by causing them to suffer. By creating tragic events in history, they're going to ask, well, how do you respond to tragic events? You'll soon see, you'll study in the text Maimonides. The typical response to tragedy and to impossible events is to look at yourself and say, what can I do to improve myself? So the response to tragedy is really tshuva. So God will create tragedy, He'll create a Eichmann so that Israel should do tshuva. No. Rabbinic theology. Soloveitchik also plays with this. But he offers a different thing. Not that God is going to bring evil decrees. I feel so bad that I have to disagree with all these people. But I haven't started yet. Maimonides as well in Hilchot Tshuva claims that if Israel doesn't do tshuva, they will not be redeemed. V'kva hiftichu Torah, and the Torah promised, shesof Yisrael yaseh tshuva. The Torah promised that in the end of history, Israel will do tshuva. So I always, when reading the Rambam, I would say to myself, how does the Torah promise? If freedom is a permanent condition of man, how can you be certain that the Jewish people will do tshuva when the moment for redemption should come? The Torah promised. It makes no sense. So what does Soloveitchik do? He says, how on one level Maimonides writes that to believe in the coming of the Messiah is one of the essential principles of Jewish faith, and yet writes that Geula, Messianism, depends on tshuva. If it depends on tshuva, then it's uncertain. Maybe they won't do tshuva. So why do I have to believe with a perfect faith in Messianism? Maybe it'll never happen because Israel won't do tshuva. So then Soloveitchik comes with his move. To believe in Messianism is to believe in the Jewish people. To believe ultimately that the Jewish people will never sink to utter decadence, and that the Jewish people in some way will always carry the torch of Torah. Lahamin b'biat HaMashiach is lahamin b'klal Yisrael. That's what Soloveitchik writes in his Drashos and Al HaTshuva. When I read this, I said to myself, but I don't believe in the Jewish people. I don't believe that the Jewish people will never become secular. I don't believe that the Jewish people are intrinsically people of faith, that their souls will never be contaminated by the secular world. So if I don't believe, then I don't have any faith in the coming of the Messiah. Then what happens? I get rid of the whole messianic doctrine? I always don't like those views who mythologize the Jews. Rav Kook does it as well. The soul of the Jew is unique. The Jewish people are a spiritual people. What are you talking? Go to Manhattan, Fifth Avenue. What do you see? People walking around. What's the meaning of existence? What are they doing? Asking ultimate questions about spirituality? I mean, go along. I used to ask people when I came in Aliyah, because I had this vision that prophets walk the streets of Jerusalem. So I went to an army officer and I say, what do you dream about? So I was expecting him to say, and the sword will be turned into the plowshare. And all this dreams of a better world and justice triumphing. So he says, who has time to dream? I'm training all the time. Who has time for these dreams? And then I realized what my mission in Israel is going to be. Do we have time when we are worried and suffering and fearful to think of a better world? Do we allow ourselves the luxury of imagining that there will be a better world? This is a very important question. Or do we don't want to walk around disappointed and filled with despair when we see that the world is not undergoing great changes? What do we feel in Israel when we see Messiah is not walking the streets and Israelis are not pure? I mean, you read the papers, so many murders going on and stealings and raping. In the 30s, they used to say, we have now returned to normalcy. We can now expect a Jewish prostitute. Baruch Hashem, we have achieved true normalcy. You walk in Tel Aviv and you'll be propositioned in 15 minutes. I'll tell you the street. And the point is not to know the street, but to know that the same difficulties in raising a Jew in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Manhattan exists here. There's no such thing as living in the air of Jerusalem, that spirituality comes by itself. I don't believe in the inevitability of the Jews remaining a Torah people. I could imagine us disappearing and not having any connection to Torah. And the one who shared this belief with me and always attacked me when he thought I wasn't was Yeshaya Leibovitz. He in some way lived with the thought that the Jews are going to disappear in 50 years. And I told him, I don't, Shaya. He said, the very meaning of Israel is going to force you to be Jewish. He says, Hartman, mat shtuyot, and he would attack me viciously. If you knew him, he wasn't a mild-mannered man. And when he attacked, it was like a real lion. But, I survived the attacks. But the point, he really raised a serious question. He lived with the terror and fear that the Jewish people are going to disappear. He really felt that. He says, what mitzvah are they doing that is connecting them so seriously to the Jewish tradition? Do they take mitzvah seriously? Are they bothered when they don't do a mitzvah? So what are you talking to me about the Jewish people? Jewish people like any other people. The thought that in some way we are ontologically different. Our souls are protected by God's gift is really, for me, nonsense and must be thrown out the window because it creates passivity and it doesn't challenge us to really go about in self-renewal and into change. Now, so Hartman, so what do you believe in? I say, let's look at the book of Genesis and the book of Exodus in your texts. Bill, you want to announce the page?
Page 2 for Genesis.
You want to give me a pamphlet as well? Page 2. Okay, who wants to read? Here's the scene when Joseph is welcoming his father after he has saved the economy in Egypt, and the king says, bring your father here so we can really honor him for all the good that you do. So that's what the text says. Look, you read it? Just look at it for a second. Verse 5, and Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, saying, your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Let your father and brothers live in the best of the land, in the land of Goshen. Let them live, and if you know any men of activity among them, make them rulers over my cattle. What does Pharaoh say to Joseph? Let them come. They'll be given the best opportunities to survive. Great, that's the end of Genesis. Now look at Exodus. So that's the scene at the end of the first book of the Bible. The Jews are given the opportunity to choose the best in the land. Everybody's excited by them. They have saved the economy. They come into Egypt triumphantly, with self-assurance, unique and respected, loved, appreciated. Okay. Will you please? Verse 6. Okay, Bill, you want to read that? And Joseph died,
and and all his brothers and all that generation. And the people of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and became exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. There arose up a new king over Egypt who knew not Joseph. And he said to his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply. And it may come to pass that when there would be any war, they would join our enemies and fight against us, and so get them out of the land. Therefore did they set up over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were mortified because of the people of Israel.
What happened? And a new king arose who didn't know Joseph. What do you mean didn't know Joseph? I mean, they look up the library. I'm sure there was a report that Joseph saved the economy, increased the wealth of the country. They didn't know about Joseph. What does it mean? Vayokom melech chodesh asher lo yada et Yosef. And suddenly the Jew, instead of being welcomed and loved, becomes the fearful stranger that he will join. Again, the king is worried about a particular insurrection, and he always has the feeling that the Jews are going to be part of that. Can you trust the Jews? They are strangers. They are different from us. Let us deal wisely with them. What must we do? We must break their spirits, break their sense of freedom, make them into slaves and taskmasters. And then the book of Exodus goes on as the experience of Egypt and the oppression goes on. What's going on? You got the message? You're loved and you're threatening. You're welcomed and we got to kick you out because we're frightened of you having too many children. What happened? What happened was that a new king came and didn't feel obligated to tell them choose the best of the land. So what does the Bible do in a very interesting way? This is the foundational text of Judaism. The foundational text of Judaism is the Jewish people going into slavery in Egypt. Even though Abraham is told that that's going to happen, that's a later version. But ultimately, they are cast into suffering without an explanation. Why should they be made into slaves? What did they do wrong? So when the Bible says if you sin, you'll be punished, you could understand. But here there's no explanation of any sin that would explain them being punished. So why were they slaves? Why did they suffer? There is no explanation. There is no explanation given. This is very important. In other words, the Bible gives you the foundational text of Judaism. Is the arbitrary invasions of radical evil, of unpredictability. So you come into Egypt and you settle in the land of Goshen and you build duplexes and build beautiful homes, but are you secure? Do you feel safe? Do you feel that the world will appreciate what you've contributed? That's what Jews in Germany thought. I mean, we are Germans. You read Hermann Cohen, why he was an anti-Zionist. He says, we're living in the most enlightened country of the world. We need not worry. We have to join this great civilization of Kant, Bach, Beethoven. This is a country of culture, music. This is a country of philosophers. The Jews of Poland, they speak Yiddish. They don't even have a pure language. They don't go to the opera. They don't know about ballet. And you just have to listen to, what's his name? Who's the Jewish comedian? Jackie Mason's takeoff on Jews going to the ballet. I love it. They go to the ballet and they sleep through it. but they come out saying, "Were you in the ballet?" And he does it magnificently. The Jews of Germany would go to the Jews of Poland and say, "You go to the ballet? Do you know about the concert? Were you at the opera? Have you read Kant? Have you read Schelling?" And the Jews of Poland would say, "Was redst du Narrigkeit? Was redst du? Wer weiß, was du redst wegen Kant, Bach? So den Goyim, was sagt er? Ich verstehe nicht, was du redst." And there was a gap between Poland and German Jews that was higher than the Berlin Wall. They couldn't speak to each other. For a German Jew to do a shidduch with a Polish Jew, they would say shiva. You're marrying into an inferior race. So we were so welcomed in Germany. Vayakam melech chadash. Then a new king arises, and the Jews in Germany couldn't believe it. I've read letters of what great rabbis in Germany felt. It can't happen here. This is the land of culture. This is the land of philosophy. It's the land of truth. What they forgot was that there's no certainty in history. You're never protected without fear. And that's what the Jews in Israel learned in the Yom Kippur War. Those who were here when the army, impeccable, Chel Avir, they can't touch us. The 6-Day War created a sense of Superman. And suddenly, in other words, the fear of living on the margins of history has been overcome. There's the new Jew living in Israel, the safe Jew. I used to listen to all the chiefs of staff in their talks, always. It will never happen here. Finally, we protect Jews. Finally, we watch over Jews. And that's why there was a great orgasm in the country at the Entebbe War. When they rescued Jews, that was for them like food for the soul. That's what the new Israeli is about. Then suddenly, boom, we're attacked. And Golda Meir gets on the television, white like a ghost. And she says, "I have to tell you that we've lost over 5,000 troops." And suddenly, Israelis discovered the Galut. They discovered the destiny of the Jewish people to live in the contingent, to live in the unpredictable, and that nothing could ever eliminate that factor. Once I discovered that, I gave up messianic politics and I stopped writing on Messianism. So what does messianism mean to Hartman? Don't you believe in some messianism? Do you believe that messianism predicts the future of history? I don't. I have no certainty about the future. So what does messianism mean for me? Messianism is the ability of a people to dream of a new future and never give up on the possibilities of human development. Messianism is to embrace the feature of possibility, to live with the concept of possibility. I always, in my writing, if you've read it carefully, and I'm sure if you've read all my books, tell me you did. Right. I'm not going to accuse you for lying, because I want you to give me the illusion that people read my books. I need that illusion, because why would I write? Who would do anything without fantasies? Who would get married if he was realistic? I often say that the reason why the music goes so strong at the wedding, so that the Chassan Kala should not understand what happened. It's not funny. When we become realists, we go to sleep. When we in some way dream, and we let the concept of possibility, not necessity, enter into our consciousness, we are now prepared to move. Israel has given back, not messianism, but has given back the concept of possibility. Israel is an opportunity, not necessity. Israel is a possibility. There's a possibility that we can build a political order filled with justice and kindness. We can build a society that looks after the poor and that treats the weak with compassion. Does it exist? I don't know. But there's a possibility that maybe, that possibility is messianism for me. So messianism is not a prediction to history, it's a norm of history. It's a norm as to what a political order could look like. It's a norm telling you what is a social structure of reality. So it's where hunger is overcome, where poverty is overcome. So in other words, it's not telling you that in 50 years it's going to happen. Just wait. And nothing is going to happen. Nothing happens from above. When the Gemara says it's dependent upon tshuva and ma'asim tovim, they were saying something very realistic. Unless human beings change. So messianism is not a prediction what's going to happen. It's an opportunity and the belief that human beings can change. When the Minister of Education asked me, Raful, who was then Chief of Staff, after the Yom Kippur War, and Raful told Hammer, you have to educate Israeli youth for perpetual war. And that war is going to be a permanent feature of our existence in Israel. As the book of Judges in the Bible, 20 years and then they return to the same suffering and the changes are not permanent. So he said, David, as his advisor, do you agree with Raful that that's what I should educate Israeli youth? I said, Zvulun, absolutely not. Why not? Because Judaism is built on the concept of possibility. I will never give up hope that one day Arabs will wake up to the reality that we're here. I will never, if I give up the dream that there's a possibility of tshuva and ma'asim tovim in the hearts of my enemy, I cease being a Jew. If I deny the possibility of change in human beings, I leave Judaism. God in Judaism is, I will be. The meaning of faith is to believe in an open future. God is never, I was, but I will be, Eheyeh. I will be. Look to a future that may happen. And this is a fundamental experience of Jewish spirituality for me. So do I have a certainty? No. Do I live with possibility? Yeah. And because I live with possibility, I have to keep on working. I can't give up. We are a joke before God. And I always said God was bored. And therefore he created human beings to watch us struggle through the vicissitudes of life. For me to be able to hold on in the midst of those vicissitudes. To be able to walk through a hospital where you see people dying of cancer, and to leave with a will to live. And that's the meaning of Israel for me. Not messianism, not certainty, but the will of a people after Auschwitz to continue living and to make themselves visible and vulnerable That is the messianic spirit. Not predictions of redemptions, of the world will change and everything will look beautiful, and Obama will love the Jews. I have no predictions of what history is going to be. I live existentially today. This moment is all I have. The reality of the now, not of the now with possibilities, but the now. What am I going to do now? Knowing that I'm vulnerable, knowing that I'm in pain. What do I do now? How do I build in the midst of the uncertainty? How do I love children and bring children in the world after experiencing a tragedy and seeing a child die? Do you bring in another one to bring about the same vulnerability? To live is to be exposed to the negative possibilities of life. To live is to, in some way, a great adventure. And what are you going to decide to do? That's my conception of Jewish history. That's my conception of halacha. That's my conception of mitzvah. The duty to acknowledge the challenge of now, and don't postpone that now with some idle dream of what you think the future will be. I don't know what the future will be. Forget about it. Exhaust the potential of the now. Drain it out. Sink into it. Seek the possibilities of the world you live in. That's living. So Hartman, you have no messianism. You live in uncertainty. That's true. But is my life filled with despair? Hopelessness? No. So you're able to smile and laugh and give a lecture before all the rabbis and lay people on the contingent features of history. And you remember the definition I read? Where you can't predict the future? Again, contingent. I've worked myself up to get an Oxford dictionary. The absence of certainty in events, the absence of necessity, that's the contingent view of history. So I part with Soloveitchik, I part with Maimonides. I think Maimonides would agree with me, because he didn't in some way live with the thought of necessity in history. If you read Hilchos Tshuva, he didn't say it that way. I have more chutzpah than him. I speak before more open rabbis and lay people who are prepared to travel in new paths. Believe in your own ability to grow. And if you do that, life is possible. Thank you.